In my previous video, I used an episode of the X-Men animated series to illustrate how acts of violence can be staged artificially in order to feed the media with misinformation and thus sway public opinion. Today I'd like to direct your attention to a phenomenal anime series called Legend of the Galactic Heroes. For anyone who thinks that Japanese anime is just a bunch of stupid nonsense and you can't take it seriously, well, you are mostly right, especially as far as modern anime goes. But there are some pretty fantastic older anime series, such as this one. A Legend of the Galactic Heroes is a vast, complex space opera that was originally a series of science fiction novels written by Yoshiki Tanaka. And these have actually been translated into English and published by Viz Media. I've bought the first one so far, but I have not yet read it. It's really fantastic that these have been translated in English. So I want to discuss the events of episode 23 of the first series of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. At this point in the story, the Galactic Empire has been split into a civil war when the Emperor suddenly dies without naming a successor. Reinhard von Lohengrin, the protagonist, a young man of lesser nobility who has sworn to bring down the nobility for their many injustices, he has led the successful campaign against the nobles who have sided with Prince Braunschweig. In this episode, one planet called Westerlund is swept with populism and its citizens revolt against the tyranny of the nobility. The nephew of Prince Braunschweig is killed in this revolt, and the people are looking to Reinhard to rescue them. Braunschweig orders a nuclear strike on the planet, much to the astonishment of the others. He's reminded of how the use of nuclear weapons has been taboo since the 13-day war that nearly annihilated the human race. But his decision is that it is his territory and he can treat his citizens however he sees fit. So the order for this nuclear strike is relayed to Reinhard by his chief of staff, Oberstein. Now, being a fairly, righteous young man, Reinhard plans to dispatch a fleet immediately to intercept the nukes. But Oberstein recommends that they stand down so that an example could be made to all of the empire of how rotten Braunschweig and the nobles are. And if the attack is recorded, it could be broadcast throughout the empire for propaganda purposes. Reinhard protests, saying that there are 2 million people on Westerlund, and that you just can't calculate human lives like that. Oberstein, he insists that he weigh the outcome logically, and that the treachery of the nobility would only continue unless an example is made. So Reinhard admits that the willingness to accept losses for the greater good is the fundamental logic of Machiavelli. So he decides to just give it some time to consider. And he eventually does direct a fleet to intercept the nukes, but not before Oberstein orders a reconnaissance probe to Westerlund first. So the probe arrives at Westerlund, where people are awaiting their fate. They've heard that Reinhard von Lohengrin is the friend of the common people, and they await their salvation. And then the nuclear strike hits them, and the settlement is obliterated. Later, Reinhard is surprised to see that his fleet did not reach Westerlund in time. Oberstein lies and says that the nuclear strike was earlier than anticipated, but said that the images of Braunschweig's treachery will be broadcast throughout the empire. He says that even a child would see that righteousness is on their side and that justice will prevail. Reinhard realizes that Oberstein has deceived him, but Oberstein's attitude is like, what's done is done, we must make the best of the situation. Afterwards, rumors reach the ears of Siegfried Kirchheis, Reinhard's best friend since childhood, and who was also one of his commanders. People find it a bit odd that a probe was able to reach Westerlund before the nuclear strike intercept fleet, and that the task force was sent was just a little bit too late. So, it's just kind of strange that this probe got there, but the ships couldn't. Does seem indeed to be a bit too convenient. So, in the case of this story, a genuine threat was not prevented. Even though advanced warning was known, they knew what was going to happen, and there was a stand down. Just a hesitation long enough to allow a horrible act of brutality to take place before action was taken. Activity was made beforehand to prepare for this act of terrorism, and the incident was allowed to proceed. Then the incident is exploited for political purposes. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Machiavelli's work, The Prince, I studied this in high school a bit in my humanities course. Just think of it as a chess game. In order to get to checkmate, you have to sacrifice your pawns and some other chess pieces along the way to get to your goal. That is basically the blueprint that Machiavellian logic puts forward. You have to you have to sacrifice some people for the greater good. So, while staged events are considered false flags, like I mentioned in my previous video, one can argue that actual events in which people are allowed to be harmed or killed in order to sway public opinion can also be considered a false flag. So if you know somebody is going to do something and you don't do anything to prevent it so that you can exploit the situation, that is a false flag, even though the person might genuinely, is going to do something and it's not something that you've concocted on your own. That could be a false flag. Perhaps such incidents are simply allowed to happen, while they could also be devised to happen. Either way, that is rather frightening. They are not natural, and thus they are considered false flags.